All right, it's 5:45. We'll call our meeting to order. Good evening and welcome to our regular board meeting, May 13th, 2024. Start with roll call.
Amy Riddle Swanson. Dave Smith.
Here.
Dominique Stewart. Here. Rachel Henderson.
Here.
Dale Dahlke.
Here.
Amber Kirsting.
Here.
Emily Hines.
Here.
Michelle Dupree.
Here.
Angela Wall.
Here. And we have a quorum. Let's stand for the pledge of allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Our mission statement: the school district of the Menomonie area, by embracing the unique needs and using the strengths of our diverse community, is dedicated to preparing all students to become lifelong learners, caring individuals, and responsible citizens. Do we have any opposed or proposed changes to the agenda order? Seeing none, we'll move on to recommendations and commendations. We have some of our retirees here this evening. Thank you for making the time to be here. We are saying goodbye to some wonderful staff this year, and we wanted to take a moment to acknowledge all of those. I'm going to read out the list of our 2023-24 retirees, knowing that some of them aren't here, and those of you who aren't, come on up and we can see the picture for you. So retiring this spring are Jane Anderson, Julie Iden, Matt Flug, Jody Henderson, John Kitzman, Teresa Kraft, Heidi Pelkey, Lynn Newland, Sherry Schwartz, Stacy Siegley, Jennifer Smith, Lynn Starkey, Ryan Stockey, Carla Taylor, and Karen Wick. So folks who are here, please come on up. Thank you. Thank you so much for your use of service. Thank you.
We'll get a group picture if that's okay.
There you go. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I think that matters. Thank you. And Julie, thank you.
So we'll get a group picture.
There you go.
There you go.
One, two, three. Thank you. And also this evening, we are proud to have received a school district award from CBTC, the CBTC President's Award, and Brian Seglin is going to introduce that.
I'll start from here and then I'll have some of our staff that are here to join with us. In April, on the 24th, the school district of Menomonie area received the Chippewa Valley Technical College President's Award. And in short, the President's Award is presented to a recipient, or in this case, a district, first time a district has received the award, in recognition of an effort of advocacy within school districts for dual enrollment partnerships with CBTC, creating and sharing of best practices with other districts, communities, groups, legislators, and other educators, as well as the promotion of college credit opportunities to other schools. So just a bit of history, very brief. Currently, our school district has 22 different courses that are offered for dual enrollment with Chippewa Valley Technical College. That consists of 2 academies, the Business Management Academy and a Healthcare Academy that leads to a 2-year associate's degree, as well as a healthcare certificate. We're adding electrical maintenance in the fall with CBTC as well. So with us this evening, we have some representatives from the CTE department. So, and one of our guidance counselors, and Susan Mumson is here from an administrative standpoint. So Lori, Angie, Nanette, yep. Susan, come on up.
Okay, so like Brian said, this is a real prestigious award from CBTC. And we would like to recognize Brian for his terrific work with the leadership piece on this. Angela Rumpke, one of our high school, you could face that way, one of our high school counselors, Lori Krause, our family consumer economics, Nana Goodman from our business department, and Mrs. Momsen from the high school administration team. Come on up, Susan, and Sam can take a picture. Let's get the trophy and certificate out front also. I often get asked, what am I proud about with our school district? And there's millions of things that I'm proud about. But this certainly is one of the things that I'm very proud that we've done to expand offerings for students, to allow students to not only receive their high school diploma, but also their 2-year degree. Thank you, all of you, for your hard work.
All right, thank you all for being here, and congratulations. All right, next up, we have our May highlight on youth.
So this has been a great start to the meeting. First, we recognize terrific retirees, now an award from Chippewa Valley Technical College. And then now we're talking about our May highlight on youth. And it's hard to believe this is the last regular school board meeting during the 2023-2024 school year. It blows my mind how fast it goes all the time. But when we look at the highlight on youth, it's just packed full. And that is one of the challenges of getting towards the end of the school year, is the number of activities is immense. And I really applaud our students, our staff, our families, and our community for all the support in providing these opportunities for our kids. So just running from the top, I'm not going to read the whole thing. This is available for anybody, and I'll be sending it out tomorrow. But the high school highlighted the jazz band, the anatomy and physiology class, the multicultural club, also our 3 students who presented information about the Global Scholars Program, and then certainly prom was a big event for the high school. With the middle school, our choir auditioned and was chosen to sing at the Capitol down in Madison. Appreciate Mrs. Enyart and the great work by her and her students. Also, the Multicultural Club took a field trip, and that was with the high school, and they saw the production of The Late Homecomer in St. Paul. Also, the middle school had their musical Spamalot. Downsville Elementary School, they highlighted the Science Olympiad team. They did a terrific job competing at the middle school competition. Also, the 5th grade completed their DARE program and had a DARE program graduation. At Knapp Elementary, they highlighted the students with peep stacking challenge during their monthly Cardinal Crew meeting. Board member Dale Dalkey was also highlighted for his work with the release of rainbow trout in the Knapp Pond. And then again, 4th and 5th graders participating in Science Olympiad. Old Lawn also mentioned Science Olympiad and Junior Achievement, and they also mentioned how the 2nd and 3rd graders performed their concert with the theme Dreamers. River Heights Elementary School, if you go by the River Heights playground and parking lot area, you can see that it's been really decorated. And our PTO group, along with staff members who volunteered their time, decorated the blacktop with things that our students can use when they go out for recess. I know on social media I saw pictures, I think it was Foursquare, There's also some different shapes and trails and things like that, so that was terrific. Also, we had a visit from an author, cartoonist, and illustrator, Donald Hurd. She gave presentations and illustration opportunities for rural high students. Students and staff also dressed up in traditional Hmong clothing. At Wakanda Elementary School, students did a great job with their walkathon and field day, and 40 Wakanda Stars proudly represented the school with a science Olympiad competition. And then the kindergarten concert was a roaring success as they brought to life the beloved classic, Where the Wild Things Are. So great job, everyone. Terrific month, and we'll finish strong. That's the highlight on me.
Great. And next up, we have our last visit from our student representative for the school year.
Good evening, members of the school board. We are honored to stand before you once again to share some updates on the recent achievements of our school community.
Congratulations to our HOSA state competitors. They all did amazing in their competitive events. 2 members are in first place in the state for the EMT competitive event. They are qualifiers for internationals in Houston, Texas later this summer. Secondly, HOSA planned a mock drama for May 2nd to illustrate the importance of safe driving and reduce the incidence of drunk and distracted driving. Due to rain, our outdoor portion of the event was canceled, but we still held the assembly portion with guest speakers from Olson Funeral Home and Katie Wittig. This event was coordinated with help from the Mayo Trauma Injury Prevention Coordinator and other volunteers from Mayo Clinic.
On April 7th, 8th, and 9th, Menomonie High School FBLA traveled to Green Bay to attend the 2024 State FBLA Conference. 12 MHS FBLA students qualified for this highly competitive event.
GAC celebrated the achievements of this year's Global Scholars, Madeline Middlestadt, Kiana Frank, and Isa Gomez. They have put in countless hours outside of the school day to expand their cultural awareness.
The MHS State Forensics team earned the Distinction in Speech Award at this year's state festival. This recognition is given to schools that place in the top 10% of all participating schools across the state at the festival. This marks the 15th consecutive season the team has earned recognition for being in at least the top 10% of all schools at the state competition.
Through club members' fundraising efforts, the MHS Spanish Club was able to take a close-to-home field trip to Cancun restaurant where they had ample opportunities to speak Spanish with the owners and staff. Next, they visited El Supermercado Veracruzana, where the owners welcomed them with goodie bags and allowed them to try horchata, which is a refreshing beverage made of rice, milk, cinnamon, and water. Lastly, students visited C&J's Candy Store and Scoop Shop, where they could check out all the international candy options.
On Friday, April 26th, Coach Jockinson's leadership class spent the day with the district SOAR program. They put together a fun-filled day where 6 different stations for the SOAR students to participate in. They interacted with all levels of our program and were able to socialize and take away some life lessons from the day. All students from the SOAR program had a blast, and we can't thank Coach Jay and the leadership kids enough for interacting and embracing what our kids have to offer.
The boys tennis team made history in their conference dual match against Eau Claire Memorial. With a match score tied at 3-3, Andrew Bush made an incredible comeback to win the deciding match. This is the first time Menomonie has beaten Eau Claire Memorial since the 1999-2000 season, and is the first time any conference school has beaten Memorial in a duel since 2006.
Mr. McMahon and his environmental biology classes received the Friend of Menomonie's Urban Forest Award from the City of Menomonie for all of their efforts in removing buckthorn and replanting the Galloway Creek corridor with native tree species.
This spring, MHS has partnered with Dunn Energy Co-op to establish an osprey nesting platform on a 55-foot pole in the prairie behind the high school. Students were able to view the pole and platform as it was put on the grounds, and are hopeful it will be inhabited in the near future. The materials and donated time are much appreciated, and this will serve as a supplement to multiple classes within our science department.
Juniors took their final STAR test of their high school careers, and multiple students improved their Lexile scores by more than 250 points. That's almost 3 years of growth in a single year. And sophomores are headed into their final debate unit in which they discuss timely and relevant issues facing education today. Students will love to chat with school board members over email, on the phone, or in person to learn more about these issues and how to advocate for their beliefs.
MHS had its first ever art show on Saturday, May 11th. Over 400 pieces of artwork were on display. They are so happy to have been able to share all of the amazing work created this year with the community. Also, Student Council, this last week was Teacher Appreciation Week, and Student Council sponsored a teacher luncheon where we gave all of the teachers a taco bar. That was what Student Council did.
And then we also sponsored this fun dress-up day where teachers dressed up as students and students dressed up as teachers. The teachers had a lot of fun with this one, and we gave out prizes that were donated to us from Winter.
And also, we'd just like to thank all of you for having us this past school year. It has been a great time, and we hope to be back next year since I'm a junior and she's a sophomore. That's how we have.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you again for your time and being here. I hope they're bombing because we had some little gift bags for you. Appreciation for your time commitment and bringing all this very awesome information to us. We really appreciate it. Since you mentioned the sophomore debate class, I actually was honored to be contacted last year by a sophomore and had a conversation for that debate class, and it was delightful. And so if someone reaches out to any school board members, I encourage you to participate. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
All right, next up we have community communications. Looks like we have two speakers tonight. First is Josie Hillman.
Thank you. I'm Joseph Dillon, and I live in Knapp. Dr. Zadowski and members of the board. This is a time of year when policies are reviewed regarding curriculum and library books. Those policies give guidance as to which high-quality materials will be continued into the next year and which may be upgraded. It seems wise to carefully evaluate policies as they will be used to screen curriculum and in turn to affect the education of our children. I've been watching, as you know, the gender policy plan and observing how it affects our library and curriculum materials and in turn affects the young minds and behavior of our students. If there are flaws within the policy that cause harm to our SDMA students, it would seem appropriate and even necessary to make those changes to the policy. Sometimes it is deemed necessary to paddle against the flow for the safety of our children. You know that in today's world, our students are greatly influenced by not only the school and their peers, but also by social media. Certainly, we want our schools to set a high bar to do the right thing. You have all been educated on the very sad story of Chloe Cole and how she was harmed in many ways by the application of policies that promoted lies about human sexuality. In her case, she was told that she could change her biological sex if she wanted to. She tried and harmed her body, mind, and spirit. Her testimony serves as an example to school board policy. And I would say that the policy that her school board used was very similar to ours in the way it harmed her. So what I'm asking you to do with the SDMA Gender Policy Plan, I'm asking you to remove gender identity, unquote, from your non-discrimination paragraph. Gender-confused students must be protected from these lies. It does them harm in so many ways. The teachers and peers of gender-confused students should be allowed to correct them without fearing being called a bully or hearing that they are going against school policy. Please do this for the safety of SDMA children, even if this means standing up against wrong Wisconsin statutes. It is best for our children. You can stand in between. Furthermore, the curriculum and library materials also need to affirm the truth about human sexuality and not teach lies. As you know, I have found egregious lies in the books in Knapp Elementary School. They remain there, hiding behind such things as this faulty gender policy plan. Do the right thing. Remove them. Let Chloe speak. Respectfully, Joseph Hillman.
And our second speaker tonight is Nick Cooper.
Good evening, I'm back. I would like to start by commending the district for the autism program at Wakanda Elementary. My daughter-in-law and son are very happy with the environment that is available for my 3-year-old grandson to develop in. And the program, according to her, is free of gender indoctrination or grooming. So I wish to say on behalf of my family, thank you. I also came across a quote that brought the school district to mind. The quote goes like this: "Love does what is right, even when it is unpopular. That is because love is driven by reality rather than perception. Love is driven by truth." In order to discuss this quote, a common understanding of terms is necessary. In order for the left to destroy culture, the first thing it does is take control and distort the language. This is done by changing the meaning of the words. For example, marriage, since the dawn of time, has meant a union between a man and a woman. Now, it's defined as really a union for whatever you want. The definition of woman cannot even be given by a Supreme Court justice. Where does that leave us in conversation? We must have a reference of terms. In order for the quote above to make sense, the definitions of right, reality, and truth must be clear. In looking them up, I use a reputable non-book dictionary. Then again, the quote goes, "Love does what is right when it is unpopular. That is because love is driven by reality than perception. Love is driven by truth." So the word right means in accordance with fact, reason, or truth. It's correct. Reality is the state of things as they are, rather than as they are imagined to be. Truth is the real facts about a situation, event, or person. The goal of the public schools should be to teach the truth, which has to be based in reality, not leftist ideology. You owe it to the students to teach the truth. How many genders are there? 2. Marriage is between a man and a woman. What is a woman? A human being with 2 chromosomes and can bear children. Anything else is not the truth. So, are you about teaching the truth or something else? If it is love for the students, how can it be anything else? Thank you.
Next on the agenda, we have a review, revenue and expenditure report for the month ended April 2024.
Okay, we'll take a look at the revenue report first, if you'd like to open that. So for the month of April, for our general fund, I have down at the very bottom that we did receive in our common school fund library aid, and then we also received it in local revenues and fees and also some grant revenues. So for the general fund, year to date, we've received in $19,431,872.76. In our gift donation fund 21, we've received in $618,257. And then for our special education fund, we received in $1,620,988.31. All of which is typical for this month, for the month of April. Moving on to the expense report by function, we'll take a look at that one next. For our general fund 10, that's our operational fund. If you look over on the right-hand side under year-to-date, April 24% spent, we're at the bottom there by the line, the total fund 10, we're at 54.84% compared to 57.36% last year at the same time. And the prior year was at 62.35. If you look at all the various account numbers on this report going down, you'll see some are a little bit lower maybe this year than they were in prior years, and I noted them at the bottom. the first thing is timing of purchases and when bills are paid. That can vary between 1 month to the next and vary, 1 year to the next. If it's paid in 1 month last year and this year it's paid in different months, that would impact that. We also have our ARPA. It's a ESSER 3 grant for the Boys and Girls Club for both after school and summer school. So we have budgeted summer school expenditures and things like that that have not been paid yet. So some of those percentages are slightly lower because it's budgeted, just not paid out yet. Same with decrease in health insurance claims and also some software subscriptions. Those are online software programs, subscriptions that we have, that they're gaining more in popularity over the years, and so not all of them have been paid. And it would be one of those one-time billing from last year, maybe the year before to this year. There's more, they just haven't been paid yet. And then the last report, if we look at our expenditures by object, these are all funds combined. This year, we're at 58.37% compared to last year at this time, 59.96. So again, slightly less, but for all the same reasons indicated down below. Any questions?
Also, I just wanted to mention that at one of our recent meetings, it was suggested perhaps that we also developed a fund balance report. Leah and I are working on that and with beginning that January or July 1st, the new fiscal year. Just want to double check with the board members. Is there anything particular that you would like listed on that report other than fund balance activity?
I'm always a fan of a good graph.
Okay. Got it, thank you.
All right, if people think of something later, they can go ahead and Joel.
Yeah, but we have time.
Yeah.
We know earlier it's easier than we do.
Okay, thank you. Next up, we have our monthly employment report for the month of April. Nice and short. Do you want to take it away?
Just that we're beginning to get some new hires. You'll see with this report, there's a couple new hires, but then in the consent agenda, there'll be several new hires for next school year.
Any questions about the employment report? Seeing none. We'll move on to the consent agenda. I'll entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
Hi, second. And this month we have minutes from the board meeting on May 13th. April 8th. Special board meeting on April 22nd. Financial reports of general fund checks in the amount of $2,422,431.12. And cash receipts in the amount of $187,987.15 for April 2024 as presented. And we have at this time no donations exceeding $1,000 for the month of April. Any questions or discussion on the consent agenda? Seeing none, let's vote. And motion passes unanimously. Moving on, we have the personnel consent agenda. I'll entertain a motion to approve the personnel consent agenda.
To approve the personnel consent agenda. Dupree, second.
Thank you. We have one resignation and a full long list of 9 requests to hire. That's great. Any questions or discussion on the personnel consent agenda?
kind of an adjacent question. I'm curious when there's hiring for teacher positions, can you just review how those are posted, right? So that, you know, what's the pool from which we're, how do we post those positions, and also how are they kind of discussed internally when maybe internal candidates?
I can start, Sam, and then you can, so I will say that it can vary.
Yeah.
You know, and certainly, I think right now we're talking about for next school year, is that kind of what you're alluding to? So when we know there's a vacancy, you know, we get our retirement notices by the middle of January. There also will be other people that leave for other opportunities or whatever it might be. So we try to pick a good timing where we think, usually it's kind of late spring or mid-spring, where we'll post that. We post them internally and externally. Now, we also know that sometimes there's internal interest. So if we're anticipating some internal shuffling, we may do a 5-day internal posting first, and then fill those positions with the internal postings if we feel like one of the people is a better fit in those positions. Sometimes we will wait on the internal candidates and we'll interview the external and then make a roster decision from there. It just really depends on the position we're trying to fill and the candidates that are available. Now, Sam, do you want to comment on the candidate pools this year?
Sure. Excuse me, one thing I would add too, just real quickly, is we post externally on weekend. And so I will put a general posting out for elementary positions, knowing that we will have several to fill. And then I post specific positions for the middle school and high school when those come up. Candidate pools this year were very good in some areas. Actually, I would say it's stronger this year than they have been in the last couple of years, with candidates in areas that we hadn't typically been able to fill previously. We've had a really good pool with our school psychs. That was a longer process because that's a very competitive market. And so we did finally end up with a wonderful candidate. We're very fortunate to have coming to the district. Social studies is always a very popular posting, and so we've had a lot of those. And we're probably right around 50 or 60 applicants for elementary positions, which if I remember correctly in years past, and Michelle's kind of smiling over there, we used to have about 300 applicants, probably about 15 years ago. So to have 50 seems like a lot less, but very strong candidates and people that really want to be in our district. I was not in on the interviewing with the elementary principals, but there were several that they said, candidates that said, I just want to be in the Menomonie district. So I think we have a good reputation and we're filling with some very strong candidates.
Thank you.
Did that answer all your questions, Dave? I do want to point out, and Sam mentioned it, so when we post externally, especially like an elementary teaching position, most of the time that's going to be a general elementary teaching position. It's not going to necessarily highlight a specific grade level or school. When we post internally, that's where we'll get more specific, so that, you know, if someone is at one of our elementary schools and want to go to the other one, that will be considered. But it also needs to be pointed out, we do our best to hire the best people for the best spots. And oftentimes, that would be an internal candidate, but not all the time.
Of course, thank you.
Thank you for that explanation. Any additional questions or discussion about the personal consent agenda? Well, let's vote. And motion passes unanimously. Next up, starting on our action agenda, we have an action to approve the reduction of building level tech coaches for the 2024-2025 school year. I'll entertain a motion to approve this.
So moved. Second, Dale.
And discussion, we'll recall this has come up, I think we did discuss this a little bit at our last board meeting and quite possibly the board meeting before that. This is a recommendation that was discussed with the QIC committee and had a lot of vocal approval from the teachers on that committee. Want to say more about it?
Sure, just to tee it up a little bit, so you can see in the list of potential reductions, we're eliminating almost $2 million from our budget for next school year. $1,893,089. Now, most of those budget adjustments will be approved by the board with the preliminary budget that the board will be considering in June. However, this reduction, the reduction of technology coaches, means that we will not be issuing contracts. So that one's kind of its own separate item, and that's why it's included in tonight's agenda for separate action. The other items, Leah is building into the preliminary budget, but I don't think many people understand that we are cutting almost $2 million next year with this list, and that would be all the level 1 reductions.
And to be clear, right, this particular reduction was originally kind of on the brainstorm list as a level 2. Is that right? But there was just a lot of kind of consensus around no longer really feeling like it was necessary.
Yes, and that's a good point, Rachel. This list is fluid, and I think we've said that from the beginning, that it is a fluid list, and that, it's put into levels. It was originally put into levels based on impact, also based on feasibility and timing of when decisions could or could not be made. And originally, this reduction was in level 2, but with the feedback we received from staff and also with our leadership team, it was moved from level 2 to level 1, and that's why it's up there for your approval tonight.
Any questions about this decision or discussion?
Can you clarify QIC?
Oh, yeah, so that's the Quality Improvement Committee. So that is a committee of teachers and hourly staff. 2 board members joining that committee. They meet approximately quarterly. And this came up in discussion when the, proposed budget cuts were, that list was presented to that group of teachers. Many people really felt like this was an easy choice.
And Emily, just a little more history. Prior to 2011, most items, anything with doing with staff, for the most part, would have been dealt with through the collective bargaining agreement and the processes that go along with that. After Act 10, the school district here created this QIC group. So it's not bargaining, but it is sharing information and providing opportunity for feedback. So it's been pretty successful. We've modified things along the way, how it operates, but I think it's been a good mechanism for getting feedback like this.
In particular, in that QIC meeting, I believe, if I remember correctly, someone who was actually acting as a tech coach said this would be an okay cut to make because that role had shifted so much, kind of post-pandemic. And let me convey what I remember, and you can correct me if I misremember. But there's a lot of need to get people on board with online learning systems, online learning platforms, over several years. And now there's enough kind of organic understanding among the staff that they can help out each other in a much more fluid way. They don't necessarily need a point person for that particular task. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think so. And just to give a little more specifics to it, pre-pandemic, using the Google Suite, the Skyward Online Gradebook, and then the biggest thing was using the Google Classroom platform. That really was somewhat unique or new to many of our teachers. And then also the equipment that's being used in the classrooms and some of the computers, having someone there. And we've had different models over the past decade plus, but this is the most recent model we've had now for probably about 6 or 7 years. But like Abe said, I think people feel like it's at this point no longer needed. Not to say that we won't need additional technology support in some other fashion in the future, but I feel comfortable with this reduction right now.
Any other questions or discussion? And if not, let's vote. And motion passes unanimously. Next up, we have approval of the transportation contract for 2024-2025. Entertain a motion to approve this contract.
I move we approve this contract.
Thank you, Amber.
Second.
Motion by Amber, second by Dominique. Do you want to introduce this before we have discussion?
Sure, and actually, Amber, you certainly can discuss anything you'd like to. But we did have a committee meeting. Amber was there as well as Leah, also Ryan and Kyle Howe from Menomonie Transportation. Anything you want to mention about it, Amber?
I mean, you summed this up really nicely. We had some great conversation, just what's going on with some grants available for clean energy buses, what the more mild winter looked like, some preliminary discussion of, things that the buses might need. But they're just so wonderful to work with, and I would happily be on this committee forever.
It is a good committee to be on because Menomonie Transportation is really good to work with. I think a couple of things that we also talked about was, and Amber, this is her first year on the committee, but in previous years, post-pandemic, it's been really hard on the bus company. One, the staffing with like everybody, especially during the peak of the pandemic, but the supply chain really impacted the ability to have parts on hand. And Kyle and Ryan talked about how they've had to increase their inventory of parts just to ensure that they have parts on hand, because you can't be having a bus out of commission for months on months while you're waiting for a part. So they did a good job upping their inventory, and I think more buses were able to stay in service this year. They also talked a little bit about, we talked a little bit about liability insurance and how much that's gone up. The insurance costs for all sorts of businesses is really skyrocketed in the last few years especially. But these renewal rates are really jumping, and that impacts them. But we also talked about the potential reductions and what that potentially would look like if, for instance, we were to close our rural elementary schools. And the buses already run out there, so it wouldn't be a huge new expense to run buses to Knapp or to run buses to Downsville. But the big change would be is that our policy for busing, we do not bus students that live within a small radius of the school. So there would be more families eligible for school transportation. Now, those buses aren't necessarily packed, so I don't know that we would have to add another route or another bus. It may impact some of the pickups coming back into town. So it wouldn't be without expense, but it wouldn't be a huge expense in terms of transportation. But we had a long conversation, a lot of interesting information that was discussed, and Amber, thank you for recommending the approval.
I do have one question about the contract. Something that kind of strikes me as a little, I don't know, maybe out of date is there's a reference to the fuel cost and how there's kind of a cost sharing our fuel costs over a certain amount. And I guess strikes me the reference number is $1.25. I don't think diesel has been $1.25 in like 20 years. So I just wonder if that number, that like benchmark ought to be updated. Not, certainly there should be a degree of cost sharing and that your expenses increase and so on. But I just feel like that the reference number as being kind of, I read that as being kind of pure as an expectation number, and we're gonna, if things exceed that, I just think that number is literally decades out of date at this point.
Yeah, and that's been brought up before. I don't really know if it matters what the reference number is. So instead of recalculating, really it's just a matter of using the same reference number. Unless we were to really move it up, which, that would have to be negotiation with something else in the contract.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's really just kind of a viewpoint. It's just a figure for how we calculate the expense.
Yeah, and I understand that. I guess it just, agreed. The costs are what they are, and they have total overall costs, and this is the way we compute it, and that's fine. I just wonder if it might be worth kind of calibrating what's kind of the fixed cost versus the incremental cost at some point to see if it's more up to date. But we don't need to do that today. or even this year, but I just think this number seems very outdated to me.
Okay. We have been in business with Menomonie Transportation a long time. It's a good problem to have.
You mentioned a discussion of what the impact would be, you know, if in future years we're looking at the cuts such as closing schools. I know in the past there was a discussion about is there potential for cost savings on transportation when it comes to like shortening that down to sort of a more mandatory distance and not lengthening the busing distance. And I just wanted to say, like, I think I understood from you and from Menomonie Transportation that the savings would probably be pretty negligible, right, in terms of tweaking our routes or tweaking those buses.
You know, it's always something we can continue to look at, and as our enrollment changes, that may provide opportunities. But we look for opportunities every year, but to put it on a cut list, you know, it'd be really hard to figure, because we also don't know where students are gonna live within the district. In fact, another thing we talked about was potentially moving a couple of the elementary boundary lines to try to balance enrollment. And yeah, I really thought, especially with a few classes at Downsville or a couple classes at Downsville really being small, that perhaps we could move that boundary north a little bit. But we would almost have to move it like next to Oakland School, you know, and you could look at the map, it's like, okay, here's the boundary, well, what if we move it up, you know, this many miles, or, you know, well, by the time you move it far enough to actually capture enough students, I mean, they'd be seeing the school as they hop on the bus, and it didn't make sense.
I drive that route into town, so I believe it. There's no kids there. Any additional questions or discussion about the transportation contract? All right, thank you very much for the work that went into this, and let's vote. And motion passes unanimously. All right, on to our discussion agenda. First up, we have another review of budget correspondence. So we did this at our last meeting, and I've gotten a few more comments from community members that have come in since that time. And just in the interest of transparency, we continue to share that with the full board. And I guess we'll open it up for discussion. I don't have much else to say. If there are thoughts people have about what we've seen or questions about kind of where we're at in the process.
If I could, Rachel, I would just like to mention that I've had a handful of very nice conversations with people who were active in the February 20th referendum, you know, asking a lot of questions and sharing a lot of information. And I really appreciate people continue to stay invested in the process. So thank you to the people who have reached out. I will say that, you know, there's been most of the feedback and discussion I have had has been on some of the things on the reduction list that are certainly important, and we certainly want to continue to try to operate in a very efficient manner. But when we start looking at some of these things like, you know, back to school staff shirts or the soccer program, it's such a small amount of the overall budget that even if we cut 20 things of those small amounts, that would have a pretty significant impact on opportunities for kids and the atmosphere and environment for staff. And it really doesn't have much of an impact on the budget. I really think that there's a lot more difficult conversation that's going to have to be had. Because really, unless we're talking about some of the larger items, I think we could cut all the small items and still have a deficit. And I think some of the people I've talked with understand that. And I also just want to say publicly what I've said privately is that I do not think it's a reasonable solution to cut things like boys soccer and, cut things like field trips and cut things that, are very important to so many of our families and students, staff and community. But unfortunately, we are at a point where we're gonna have to look at somehow trying to make the ends meet. But I really think it's the larger items that are probably gonna have to be considered instead of whittling away all the, a lot of items in our district.
And in addition to what you said, I agree with your ideas of not seeing them as beneficial. The savings amount that would be there, negligible as it is, would even be less because I maintain we would lose our head count. People would send their children to schools that did offer those programs. And closing the elementary outlying schools would be another example of that. Wisco is 5 miles closer to NAP than Menomonie is. Why wouldn't they take advantage of that? And soccer program the same way, or any of those cuts, field trip cuts, they say, I'm gonna send my kid to somebody that does have field trips.
I think one really helpful thing I hope people are realizing through these discussions as more and more input comes out and people in the community have their own conversations is that there's not just, oh, we can do this one neat trick and then it's all okay, right? It's gonna, whether it is through difficult and challenging budget cuts that affect student experiences and family needs, or it's through, looking at revenue through referendums or things like that, it's going to require a lot of people to work really hard together to figure out a way through, right? There's no oh, let's just do that. Let's put it on, that group or that program. There's nothing big enough to actually solve the problem. It's really about everyone together. So I hope people are starting to realize that.
Any other thoughts or questions on this discussion item before we jump into more details of the budget?
Great, so about the only other thing I would want to add is that, in talking to some people that had a hard time with the February 20th referendum, one thing that I've heard repeatedly now, some people are very sympathetic and understanding to the school's budget situation. And I think they're willing to support a solution that includes more revenue. But two things, and I think we've already talked about this, but two things about the February 20th referendum that really made it where they were not able to support it was the fact that it was recurring, where it would continue into the future. It was not a limited term referendum. And then the other piece was the ask, the size of the ask, the 4.2 million. And, with some of the reductions that we've made and with a consideration potentially of a shorter term referendum, there may be a solution that would be more palatable even to some people who are very opposed to the February 20th referendum. That pretty much summarizes that feedback.
Do we have data from the folks who voted no? Has anybody provided that so we can analyze that to figure out? Huh?
You mean like
What did they
exit
support?
polls?
Huh?
You mean like exit polls?
Well, I'm just curious, why they didn't support it? What specific things within that did they not
I
support?
think as
Was
Bill
it
alluded,
like whole thing,
well, as Bill alluded, I think many people have had lots of private conversations with individuals, but I don't think there's any way to assess the district as a whole and that, the 59%, I don't know if we have any way to really do that.
Yeah, no, I'm just curious too. I mean, I'm looking here too with perhaps having a budget creation, is that below, or a work group for that? But just having conversations with people to dispel anything that they may have misunderstood and or provided another explanation you know, just from, like what you're saying, with people having these conversations. I think it would be beneficial for us the next time around if we choose to do that.
And I think that's what we've been attempting to do the last couple meetings, and that's what I kind of attempted to summarize right there, Emily, is that, you know, the feedback, actually, most of the feedback that I've received, and I think based on the feedback that Rachel has shared that was received written, almost all the feedback that we've received has been, don't cut. You know, we don't support these cuts, we don't support these cuts, we don't support these cuts, you know, this should not be cut. You know, that's really almost all the feedback we received. But in some of the targeted conversations that I had with people that were opposed to the referendum, it was the fact that it was recurring, the size of the ask, and then I would say another thing is that they did feel like there were some things that, you know, that the school district should reduce the budget somehow, some way, which we have. So I think that's summarizing what I've heard anyway. I don't know if any other board members have had other conversations that should be added to this.
One thing that I've heard pretty regularly is, why did we put this list of cuts out beforehand? Which I understand that impulse, but I actually think that a referendum shouldn't be driven by any sort of fear mongering, you know, and these lists, these lists are, you know, were really carefully put together, and ideally we wouldn't have to make these cuts. So I think, I don't know, but that's something that I heard is like, well, if we had these beforehand to work with, maybe we would have chosen otherwise. And I think now that we're having some conversations about there's not many cuts have to be made somewhere, it feels a little bit more real.
The other piece is the fund balance. And I know some people had difficulty with the idea of the school district asking for more revenue with the shape of our fund balance. But I think over the last few meetings, we have explained the fund balance a little bit more. I think in some of our communications out, we've shown the budget projections and how it impacts the fund balance. I still know some people would prefer to see us spend the fund balance down somewhat before we ask for more revenue. But I also think people understand that, you know, really, you know, every dollar we cut out of fund balance is costing us more than a dollar because of cash flow purposes and the cost of interest.
Although as we say that, as we start talking about our budget proposal, that, you know, we will be spending down some of our fund balance in at least this coming school year and potentially the next one. Anyone else on this topic?
If I can speak here. I went in the same direction that you did in the beginning, thinking, okay, how do we figure out from our community, you know, more detail? What do they want us to do? And I really processed that for a while, and then came to the conclusion that we already have the survey. They wanted us to cut. Like if the referendum fails, they didn't want us to keep going the way we were going. They didn't want to see us do what we could do with that referendum money. So, and it's not what I wanted, but it's reality. It's where we are. I think as far as, you know, I was at some of the meetings, the community conversations, and there was a lot of it. There were so many opportunities for people to come hear and listen, and we could have had a million more, and I think it's still just growing down. I'm gonna stop for
Maybe, to respond directly to Emily's question, and you don't have to answer this now, Joe, but I guess we did do the school perception survey, which in retrospect, it's interesting, it wasn't as favorable as we may thought at the time. It'd be interesting to think about what timelines are for those expenditures. When people actually, like, for example, one thing I heard was people complaining, why do you spend money on the survey, right? So people might want to know how much it actually costs to do such a survey, but also, you know, it might, I could imagine, I'm not necessarily proposing this right now, but I could imagine it being useful to ask questions, and they're much more focused than the first time around. Just, because now like people are informed more so than they were a year ago, and actually see if there's a way to make into some of those questions. So that'd be interesting. Might be way, it's the only way I can think of to answer your question.
Any more thoughts on this topic? If not, we will move into our discussion of the preliminary budget for 2024-25. And we'll put Leah back in,
Oh, sorry. Sorry, I was thinking about the school perception survey. So yes, Leah will handle most of this, but I do want to point out that, this has been a long process, and again, it began at the building level with our teachers, our principals, our employees putting together the budget building product. That then is brought to the district level, and the administrative team, Leah and her team, have done a great job putting everything together for the preliminary budget. So Leah, if you want to go ahead and take it away, that'd be great.
Sure. So we have a lot of documents in here loaded. Two of the main ones that we'll talk about first is the budget estimate report, and then also the budget notes. That kind of explains everything that went into building this budget and all the assumptions. So in the budget estimate at the very top, assumptions being made at this point is what our pupil membership will be. We have a third Friday count in the fall in September every year, and so until we have that count, we have to estimate what we think it'll be. So right now, our forecast model is projecting a decrease of 17 full-time equivalent students, so that's what's built into this. As that changes, we'll update it in the fall, obviously. And then our per pupil aid is set at $742 per student. That comes from the state. Our transfer of service is also the same as last year. We always estimate the same because we don't know what that exact amount will be. So our best estimate at this time would just be to project what we received before. And then it does include some carryover from, again, that Boys and Girls Club grant for summer school, and that's, again, an estimate of about $250,000. Kind of depends on what they spend during the school year this year. So it's hard to predict exactly what that amount will be. And then.
Leah, if I could just jump in.
Sure.
I just want to make sure all the board members, the 24-25 budget estimate PDF, everyone following along on that? Okay, great, thank you.
Okay, and then I broke down all the budget cuts and estimated increases, kind of by line item there, same with revenues. And then you'll see at the very bottom, the 24-25 projected deficit is just over 2 million. Once we apply all those estimates, and I say estimates because a lot of this will change by the time fall comes around. The state will certify the state aid amount, and they'll also release the equalized value amounts for property taxes. So all of that combined will be applied in the fall, and then the board sets the actual budget and levy at that time in October. This budget is to begin operations on July 1 because we need an operational budget to move forward until we have our annual meeting and then go into the fall. Any questions on this report before we get into other notes?
One question just to clarify, when we talk about that Boys and Girls Club grant, that's pretty much money in, money out. Right? The school district gets money, but it is basically all being spent in Boys and Girls Club. That's not something we could use for a teacher salary. Correct.
No, essentially, we're just a fiscal agent.
Right. Yeah.
And
It's in and out, just like you said.
as Leah gets ready to continue, I just want to point out that this budget, this preliminary budget, has very little wiggle room. in past years, we tried to leave wiggle room, in case our student enrollment was a lot different in September, or in case we needed to add a bus route. This includes those level one cuts. It takes out $810,000 of capital improvement funding. It takes out $250,000 of budget contingency. It reduces our healthcare budget by $183,000, our utilities budget by $136,000, our substitute budget by $130,000. It also reduces summer school budget by $115,000 and transportation budget by $100,000. So in some previous years, especially at the preliminary budget standpoint, where we were early like this, we really tried to build in wiggle room because there are so many factors that we're gonna learn between now and October. But with the cuts, with the budget reductions that have been made, this preliminary budget already is at a $2 million deficit. And then if our enrollment's lower or previously unanticipated expenses like an additional bus route, that's gonna go further into the fund balance. So I just wanna make sure everyone understands that.
And also to just clarify for anyone who's maybe confused, I mean, that $2 million deficit would be spending money out of the fund balance, so to begin with, $2 million right off the top.
Correct.
On the point of very little wiggle room, I think I mentioned this last time there was an estimate, but I personally feel like the health and dental at 0% is optimistic. So I hope that's accurate, but that seems like to me like one of those things that could easily be a much bigger number that we don't control. You're only gonna need direct way. So.
But back to Emily's question about the referendum failing and what some of the stuff we heard is some people felt like our budget had too much wiggle room. And so we went through with a fine tooth comb and looked at past history and also tried to make much more precise predictions, eliminating wiggle room. So with that being said, I do think that those are the numbers we are recommending this time.
Are we looking at budget notes next, or?
Yes. Okay, in this document, we break down all the major changes by fund. So we start out with our general fund 10, which is our operations fund. That's the fund that basically we just use to operate the school district. Nothing is really designated, it's just purely operations. Again, some of the estimates we've already talked about, the per pupil increase for the revenue cap is set at $325 per pupil. Our 3-year rolling average membership is down. Estimated increase in open enrollment revenue, categorical aid estimate, well, it's not an estimate, it is actual $742 per pupil. We did apply the ESSER 3 decrease. That grant is done at the end of this year, or estimated to be finished. And then we just have all the other things that impacted each fund. I'm not gonna read them all, but if anyone has any questions, kind of the notes at the bottom, overall, the preliminary 24-25 budget, all funds shows a decrease of 4.39%. And that's taking into account our debt service fund, our overall retirement fund, Fund 80, food service, all of them. And also our Fund 10 expenditures are showing a decrease of 1.32% after we've applied all the cuts and everything. As far as the levy is concerned, our equalized values, property values, we've estimated at 3%. That was the amount we estimated at earlier this spring for the referendum. We're keeping that amount. Typically, we just do a zero estimate. We calculate what we received the year before because we don't really know what that will be until October. So, but this is our best guess at this time, is a 3%. And then our projected total levy increase is 6.44%, and the mill rate projection is to decrease by 0.19. Any questions on the notes?
I think one thing that's important to point out is that not only do we have to consider the fact that this budget is reducing expenses, but this is also at a time when inflation is still above 4%. And, you know, when you factor in inflation, you know, even if you had your budget stay stable and inflation was at 4%, you're essentially 4% behind. I think we all know that from our own budgets. So now we're reducing the budget and we're dealing with inflation that's still relatively high. That's very difficult for any organization, including our school district.
I had a question about Fund 20. You have in here a note of the special education funding estimate at 29%. I'm just curious because I thought the legislature passed a law that said it was going to be 33% in the budget. And it doesn't come down to our schools that way, and I'm curious if you can just tell us why.
Sure, that's a good question. We estimate it lower because it's actually, you receive aid on actual expenses. So the actual expenses for 23-24 is what we'll get aided on.
In 24,
Yes.
in 24, 25.
Correct. And so not knowing exactly what those expenses will be conservatively or historically, it's always been a little bit lower than the average. We are getting that, but at this time, this estimate is based on 29%. Because all we have to estimate it on is our budget, not actual.
Thank you. Other questions about the budget notes? Which document should we move on to next?
Those were the two I wanted to highlight, unless someone had a question on another one.
So again, especially for new board members, Fund 10 is where most of our revenue and expenditures are coming in and out. So that Budget Fund 10 PDF is going to have the most detail on budget line items. And the other funds are relatively simple documents by comparison.
If you wanted to look at numbers by fund to see how much is in each fund, you could look at the budget summary report. That lists all of them, 10 through 80, and it breaks it down by actual from 22-23 to what the approved budget is this year, and then what the preliminary budget's expected to be next year. And it gives the change between this year's approved budget and next year's projected. So that's kind of informational too, as far as how much is in each fund.
So the budget that the board approves in June will be the budget that is published in the newspaper and in the annual meeting booklet and discussed at the annual meeting. The board will then get an updated budget in October, which will be the final budget that is then used to certify the tax levy that's sent to the municipalities. I think it's by the second Monday in November or something like that. So between now and the end of October, this is kind of the first step. The next step will be the annual meeting, and then the board will have to decide, is that the budget that you want to approve in October? We'll certainly propose a modified budget based on real information, our enrollment, tax valuation, state aid. We'll bring all that forward in a new proposed budget. And then I know there has been some discussion about potentially considering a November referendum. The board could approve two budgets in October, one with a referendum, one without, and then the results of a potential election would then determine which budget actually gets certified. That's just kind of the next steps, so you have them in your mind.
I had one another question about funding sources. So when I'm looking at, for example, the Fund 10 sheet, like if I was looking at, for example, like the other financing sources, is that sort of where any Fund 10 grants that we get are accounted for, or where would you? Because I know that we get various grants, and I realize that some, like I know we have food service grants, right, that are going to be in Fund 50, and there are specific grants for the special ed program, but.
That would be more, other financing sources, that would be leases, things like that. Grants would be from the state level in the 600 to 699, and then federal level, 700 to 799.
Oh, okay, so they're wrapped up in there, that state sources is not just state aid, but it's also statewide grants, right? Is that something that, I mean, as we talk about this difficult budget, I mean, is the opportunity for making sure that we are catching any grants that we are eligible for? Is that something that we have the capacity to kind of work on?
The way you said it, no. Can we catch every grant? Absolutely.
I don't mean, I guess not every
Right.
grant, but.
And we, that's one of the discussion topics I had with some people as well. We do try to target different grants. You know, Brian and his department has probably the largest grant that we've had with the AIM grant. Tony and her department applies for grants regularly. In fact, the most recent one that was submitted had to do with student transition, the transition readiness grant. And I think we've applied for that one almost every year. But there are others, and I know there was recently one that we weren't able to participate in. There is a capacity issue. We also don't have a grant writer, so the grants we apply for, you know, we do with the building level staff. But it's very time consuming to apply for many of these grants, especially the ones that are more competitive. And also what we've learned is that especially with the competitive grants, that they're often very targeted. So we spend time before we commit to a grant, really reading through what the eligibility is. And there's a difference between being eligible and being targeted, in my mind. And there's been some of them that we've applied for in the past where we think we put together a really good grant, but then when we've seen the recipients and you look at the demographics and you can clearly understand our demographics may have fit within the threshold of the grant, but realistically, they were not in the targeted threshold. And so yeah, we try to get as many grants as we can. We had a huge school safety grant a few years back, but there is limitations to what we can do with that. I would not count on grants to balance our budget.
Other questions or discussion on any of these budget documents we have before us?
I just thought one more thing about grants, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
Many of the grants also are grants where you could not use those grant funds to supplant something that we're already doing. They're meant to supplement, so it would be adding programming or adding something that we're not already doing. So again, it would be really budget neutral. It would just be adding an additional service or something like that.
All right, if there are no more questions about the preliminary budget, we can jump into a discussion of the creation of a budget work group. And first I want to thank Dave Smith for putting together all of this background and the proposal we have in here. I'll just turn it over to you if you want to talk about it.
Sure, so this is, this item is a follow-up from what I kind of promised you in the last meeting. Is to figure out what is a framework by which we can get some additional community engagement and discuss kind of budget priorities in a more, the way that work involves more actual interact with different subgroups in the community and bring in more viewpoints. I think, from the conversations we've been having and the feedback we've been getting since the cut list went out, there's lots of ideas and concerns and kind of nuanced views that I think, as board members, I'm hoping as a board we can kind of figure out how to really broaden our ability to absorb those ideas from the community, and also make sure community members feel they have a place and an opportunity to really discuss what's on their mind. So in preparing this, I tried to kind of figure out who to reach out to. I reached out to some people at Wisconsin Public Education Network who've been involved in other community outreach efforts. I reached out to board members in Eau Claire, the Eau Claire Area School District. Has put a lot of effort into building up their community outreach program. And also reached out to Superintendent Rebecca Toetz at the Forest, who is really, she and her communications director there have really an extremely thorough way of interacting with the community, and these kind of multi-phase, multi-level discussions. So what I realized is that it was too much and unrealistic for me to write down what a plan is. And I thought the thing to do is to lay out how could the board figure out a way to have a communication plan, particularly on the budget questions, that can happen quickly. And let me just kind of point you to the background document, and I'll just actually read the first couple sentences. So I think we have two competing needs. We need to gain insight and build trust in the community quite quickly, because we have pressing needs and pressing things to understand about the community, as Emily referred to earlier. And also, because this isn't really something that the board has tried particularly recently, we don't actually know what's going to work in Menomonie. We have a unique media environment, a unique town with different sub-communities, and so we actually don't know what's going to work. And so the idea is to try lots of things quickly in a way that, in my work, I call it kind of an agile approach, right? Let's try several things and let some people come up with ideas and try them out, and if they work, do them, try something else. So the actual idea would be to make a work group or a subcommittee, I'm not quite sure what to call it. The original word was budget work group. The word I used in the document was community engagement and priorities committee. It doesn't really matter what we call it or what the structure is. But whatever it is, it has to move faster than our board meetings. We're meeting over the summer roughly once a month. And I think that there is a prime opportunity right now to get a lot of interaction with the community and a lot of ideas and a lot of competing viewpoints discussed and aired. If we can kind of set up some community discussions of various forms quickly. So the idea, long-winded as I am, is to have a few members of the board kind of work simply to set up events, not necessarily to be there, to be the, I'm not suggesting going to be spokespeople or anything like that, just a few members of this board who are willing to basically act as event coordinators, to lay out a calendar and a few ideas, and say, okay, let's try this and this and this on these dates, and then maybe ask other board members to be present, and basically do the event planning side of things to make sure something happens, and if something happens, then we can see what works. So that's the actual proposal. Not to let me stop talking. I'm rambling too much. You can ask questions.
Questions or thoughts on this idea? Proposal, or if you have questions about any of the background information, just wanted to maybe note, I think this is obvious in board docs, but there are some templates and documents shared from these are all from Eau Claire, right? From the Eau Claire School District, I think just as sample documents, not necessarily as things we would use straight away.
Actually, this morning I got a bunch more documents from again, the superintendent from DeForest, with their plan, which is quite fascinating. It's really detailed and multi-layered. We didn't get in time to include the board docs, but it's, be pretty interesting for people who are interested to look at before that one.
Can I offer a summary of what you said?
Please.
And then you can critique it, and then I can make sure we're on the same page. So we're looking at creating a committee of 3, and their job is not to be the ones to go everywhere and get everything, but their job would be to set up opportunities for us to have smaller 2 to 3 people, board members throughout the summer collecting information. But this group of 3 would just kind of plan things. I like that.
And I don't think it would be limited necessarily to the smaller opportunities. I mean, they could also be a couple of larger listening sessions or things like that, right? Or not necessarily.
In the background document, where did I put it here?
Can I clarify your question? When you say larger listening sessions, you mean that more board members would be at?
Oh, no, I guess not. Not what more board members would be at, but they would be larger opportunities for community input. Yeah, but not larger commitment of the board. Yeah, sorry.
So previously, there's been kind of banter about maybe 3 different types of formats. One is like a minimal sit and listen. You know, we mentioned the farmers market idea, things like that. That would be very easy to plan. Like, you know, almost just choose the dates and just decide who's going to show up that day. Just make sure someone's going to show up, and ask them to take notes and, you know, be chill. There's another layer, which is a kind of the Eau Claire model that they're working on. They have these like big forums. They invite many community groups in to send representatives. They have focused conversations and breakout sessions. It's kind of almost in the direction of strategic planning process, but not quite to that degree. And then there's people discuss other kind of like medium scale things where you send, you know, you have an opportunity at the library or at some club's meeting or booster club or something to kind of be present. So kind of small, medium, and large size events. And I think the challenge is we don't know in Menomonie what of that would actually engage with people and get effective input. And so I guess my thought is we should actually try, if we can, try all of them. And the challenge, the thing that makes that very difficult, is actually just planning stuff to happen over the summer. And that's why the actual proposal is, can there be 3 people who do some event planning? Choose some events and some dates and just like get something on a calendar so that then things will get into motion for these small, medium, and large events, and we can just see what happens. I think, I'm hoping this will become an exploration that the board can do.
I love the idea. I think we should totally go for it, especially if we have an anticipated referendum coming up. I think if we have more people engaged and feel welcome to the conversation, the better. And I love the idea of having like organizations or clubs or sports that you may be part of. I mean, because there are things that I'm involved in that you may not be involved in, vice versa. So I think it's a wonderful opportunity to have conversations with people. And I like what you did with the schools and having the opportunity for people to come to schools, but I think the people that showed up to schools already support that, you know? And so it's having, we're part of the wrestling club. So I'd be like, hey, come with me, we're gonna come to the annual meeting, I want you to be here to answer questions. You know what I mean? So just having like somebody we can tag team with and just have conversations with people. I love it.
One detail I want to add to kind of make sure there's no like nerves among the admin team is that I see this as work of the board for the board, not like adding another thing on the plate of the admin team. In the sense like, you know, as board members, we're actually responsible to get, you know, to come in contact with the community. And like, this is our job, right? So I'm not proposing like, you know, that we give this to, you know, Jenny or Leah or Joe or anyone to set this up for us. Like, this is work we have to do for ourselves as a board, I feel.
That said, we will have to make sure we're compliant with open meeting laws, and so I would imagine we will be making sure that, you know, everything's properly noticed. And I think, we will be handing on that today.
question. Okay, I feel like I have a dartboard, but I wouldn't aim it at a dartboard, but I don't know where the dartboard is. So I guess my question is, clarify for me what the end goal is. What's the goal?
Can I give you two goals?
Yes,
Okay.
please.
Goal one, I think, is a long-term goal of building an established mechanism long-term for what people often refer to as transparency. But I think what they actually mean when people say transparency is they don't feel they had an opportunity as an individual to come true with their thoughts in a meaningful way. So it's an emotional connection. It's not so much that we aren't transparent because we're on camera, public notice, et cetera. So people don't feel they had a chance to engage. So I think that's a long-term goal I think the board should have, is to make sure that we provide opportunities to members of the public to share ideas in a way that is accessible to them. It doesn't require them to come to us. Not all the time, right? That's goal one. Goal two is more short-term. We are facing either or both pretty severe budget cuts, looking at the cut list, and maybe looking at a referendum, we're not sure yet. And to Emily's point before, I think we need to know what different groups in the community, what individuals in the community are concerned about in terms of what they feel comfortable with, in terms of their priorities and their desires for the district. In a way, I don't think we've actually had access to other than surveys and personal conversations. So I think being more structured about that would be very helpful to us.
One of the things that's kind of like a added benefit rather than a stated goal, I would say, that I like about this is that is the potential for this to be successful in terms of just like, are we as a 9-member board able to set up a committee? Are we able to actually meet people and it's like not, like, and it's a positive experience? I think we haven't seen, we haven't had, I think it's been uncomfortable to start smaller committees for various reasons. But I think us being able to do that puts out a really good message and it shows our community that we're able to function because we should be able to do it. Like we should be able to have committees that we've discussed and planned that function the way they're supposed to function. I love the scope you laid out. I feel very like if we were to move forward with this and I was like put on here, I feel like I would know, I would have good boundaries and like know what is necessary. So I think that's a really great opportunity that we have that's even outside of the main goal of this.
Do you envision that the committee or work group would eventually include non-school board members, like as part of the group? And, thinking about like community members or staff members or things like that. Knowing that we will be doing a lot of different things to bring people in and to have opportunities for listening, but would there be have like an intentional engagement in that group with people outside of the board?
My answer is going to seem like a cop-out, but I think we don't yet know. I think we're several steps before we can answer that question.
Gotcha.
Because I don't think we've really tried anything yet. And knowing whether there's a place for like a long-term, multi-organization group, which some districts have established and have maintained for years. I don't know that we even know if that's plausible for us or not. So I can't really answer the question.
Fair.
But I think that's what this kind of, the proposal here is to have a small group that basically establishes events through which we can figure that out over time. And one thing that is mentioned in here is to revisit, like if we were to go ahead and try this, basically revisit, in 6 months, say, in the middle of winter, what events were actually planned and when, did it work out? Was this a good experiment? It's an experiment, right? Is this a good experiment? Or is it when we should just say, that didn't work, that's a silly idea that you had, let's just move on, that's okay too. So I think it's kind of the idea of let's try a few things and see if we can, and build some conversations and some communication.
So, sorry. No, go ahead. Thanks for clarifying. I appreciate it. I'm just, I don't mean to sound negative, so I hope it's not coming across that way. It's just my voice. I'm having a hard time understanding where this would go, and I don't know if it's because of how my brain processes and likes to see that and then I like to take the action steps to get there. That's just how my brain functions, and I'm well aware that, different people think things differently. I just think we have, as a district and as a community, we have those things in place. And I don't know if it's us as a board, if it's our place to do something like that. And I'm not saying I'm not paying for, pizza and a beer, I'm fine. But that I just, and some conversation, of course, but I just I'm wondering if what you're trying to get at is what we're doing at family nights on the building level, and PTO meetings, and walkathons, and, those kind of things, and, the musicals, and sporting events, I'm just wondering if that's where all those connections are coming, and that's where they should be coming from, or if this is something that we should go forward as a board. That's just where my brain's thinking right now. Is this something that as a board we should be doing? I'm just trying to keep of water as a board member now, so.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a question I asked always when I talk to the other references I follow up with. That's a question I ask each of them is, how do you see the division between what the board does versus what the district does? What's the administrator's job versus what's the board's job? And each I talked essentially to 2 districts and some references we've done in other districts. And each of them basically had an approach where the board and the administration had different roles. And those were intertwined with things like PTO, but they were distinct. So in the example of Eau Claire, so Eau Claire is a different governance model than we do, but they actually have 2 parallel but completely distinct kind of communication strategies. One is the superintendent's communication strategy for the district, and there's this, I think they call it the family something council, family advice council, thank you, where there's been an established, group of key community members, of PTO leaders, of things like that. The administrator meets with on a regular basis to update them with kind of news and reports and so on, and share ideas. And there's a separate process, maybe with some of the same people, maybe with distinct groups, that the board does to collect this information. And then there's a sharing and merging that information from different perspectives. I think I don't know if that's appropriate for us or not, but I think that was an interesting thing. They actually said, there's ways the administrator interacts with the community, which are important. There's ways the board interacts with the community, which are important, and they may not be the same. And they may not always have the same, there is different scope. There is different, certainly anything involving a personal complaint or an HR complaint, that has to go through the chain of command, that has to go through the superintendent and Sam, and, there's a process correctly. There's also kind of general discussions that happen. In that district, at least in Eau Claire, they decided that it was important to have those discussions in different venues with different groups, and then come back and share that information amongst the entire team, including the board and the team, regularly. So I think that was an interesting approach. DeForest had a much more integrated approach, where the board and the superintendent kind of worked almost like side by side in these sorts of in a whole sequence of meetings that are laid out together. So I think there's different approaches. Yeah, I'll leave it there.
I also think, to your point, kind of there's a distinction between what you identify as sort of a long-term and a short-term goal. And, I do like the idea of getting something going quickly, seeing what works, and then reassessing. And the idea of reassessing in 6 months, maybe we realize like, there was a lot of, maybe we realize in terms of thinking about like how the board on a continuous basis engages with the community, maybe we do find that there's a lot of redundancy. But I think that short-term goal of gaining insight either into like how a community would support another referendum or how we coalesce around a decision about the cuts we're going to make in 2 or 3 years when fund balance is spent down and we have to make really awful decisions. I think when we look at the sort of feedback we've gotten from the community so far in terms of we don't want these cuts, we don't want that cut, we don't want that cut, we're going to be in the position of kind of doing one or the other. And I think the short-term goal of getting that community feedback around those things and also kind of increasing the ability of people, not just to give feedback, I guess, but to have that sense, like Gabe said, of meaningfully engaging in the process. I think there's a huge benefit to doing that in the short term, even if we sort of reassess in 6 months and think Gabe had a crazy idea.
So you're thinking each planned event would have specific questions or specific goal to find out from the community. And we would advertise that, whoever has interest in discussing that goal would show up.
So if we decide to make this kind of planning committee, and if you're on it, I think that'd be a great suggestion.
I think in the short term, it'd be really heavily focused on the budget.
Maybe one way of framing this, you were at that library event I did in January, right? Thinking back about how that discussion brought up so many concerns from so many people in one 2-hour event, right? And just thinking back, like, wow, it would have been so useful if that had happened almost a year earlier. And again in the summer, and again in the fall. And, and having that as an ongoing conversation, not just like a 2-hour blitz of concerns and complaints and questions, and kind of more like having that evolve, and then instead of, in that situation, it felt like that wasn't intended to be, but I think in the end, maybe felt like, to some people, like a sales pitch, as opposed to feeling like an actual conversation. And in fact, someone in the crowd said that day, said, this is supposed to be a conversation, right? And so thinking back, I wish there had been a more thoughtful approach by the board for the previous, 6 to 9 months leading up to that, than that just one-off thing that happened by accident. So that's kind of what I was thinking. It's like, okay, well, let's think ahead this time.
I think adding on to that, I think it was great that you did that presentation, but it could be more organic, right? It could just be more of a conversation. And I don't think it has to be as planned with like, I have to hit these 4 questions and we're going to interview or things like that. And I think people would enjoy that. Maybe some of the meetings that we plan are more targeted and have specific data to share, but otherwise I think it's an opportunity for us to connect with people in the community.
Since this is supposed to be about communication, I'm deeply curious what some of the board members haven't spoken think or are mulling over.
Like Emily said, I really like the thought of having more organic conversations, where maybe we aren't controlling like what we're talking about, what the bullet points are. Maybe just open it up for people to come to us with their ideas, with their thoughts. I think that could really provide more information than if we just go somewhere and we're like, here are the things we're going to talk about today. I know I've had a couple conversations with people at work who come talk to me because they know I'm on the school board who have, you know, if they just come and they bring their thoughts, so I think if we have an event where we're gonna be there and they can just come talk to us, I think that would be extremely beneficial. And I think this is a really great idea to try the small, medium, large, see what works the best, because like you said, we're not really sure unless we try. So I think it's a great idea.
I'm filled with thoughts. I won't say all of them. I love the intent of this, and I think doing something is really important, particularly for that emotional connection and more of an opportunity for listening instead of telling. I worry a little bit about committees to have a committee. So I think that it would need to stay pretty lean, both in order to not get too many headings and lose the intent, and to make sure we're complying with meeting rules, because that terrifies me. I just want to make sure that we're always, you know, the notices and I know, I appreciate that you put in there, thank you for this research, but the part about having meetings for scheduling purposes, I think that's key. I like the idea of being nimble, but I wonder a little bit about proper experimentation rules and not having too many variables. I'm not sure that we'll know what's working if we're doing all different sizes at all different times. Like maybe it just turns out that was a good weekend and a small one would have been exactly the thing. So I worry a little bit about assessing that with a lot of different things going on at once. And then I'm very curious about how we would document these conversations, both to keep things private or public, depending on what people want, and make sure that it's a working body of information and not just something that gets presented and then disappears after all of that work. So those are my thoughts and feelings.
I would like to just add, thanks for the work that you put into this and the thought and the context and a lot of time and thought. My first question was already answered. Michelle asked about the goals, and you did a nice job answering that. Amber kind of alluded to how would we use the information being given, and how would we assess its effectiveness? So here I address that. My only other thing, if it's mostly a listening type of format, then I guess my concern isn't so great, but I would be concerned about accuracy of information shared. In previous attempt to reach out, we had Joe there to make sure that things were accurate. And I'll speak for myself, I guess I might be the inadequate source of accurate information.
So I think that I really appreciate both those comments, and I think that one reason I actually think we need a structure is to help set some of those rules. To make it like things I think are important to say is that if there's a couple people sitting in a public place to talk with people, that like you're not speaking for the board or for the district, you're just there to listen. And also that question of anonymity, if someone comes up and shares a deeply personal story, then we have some agreed upon rule that, we ask, is it okay if I share this? And is it okay if I use your name? And we agree, like, we have some basic, and maybe, if there's a question of like, what are the key learnings, then we say, okay, let's just make sure we have we have an agreed upon either a format or a bullet point or something that at the end of each event, whatever it might be, that there's some documentation of key learnings from that event. So that having that infrastructure is sort of why I feel it almost has to be a formal subcommittee type process, because we have to have some way of deciding, how do we set those kind of, just kind of guidelines, right? And I don't want it to be like super strict, super like regimented. But I think there are some basic things about, first of all, decorum, right? I mean, and encouraging people to be there with an attitude of listening and not, it's not about, I think it shouldn't be about presenting personally. I think it should be about sitting and listening and receiving ideas, receiving information, saying, thank you, that's very interesting input, I'll write it down and share it with my colleagues. And like, that's the key step. And when someone says, I've listened to you, and I'll think about it, I'm gonna share it with my colleagues, and we're gonna discuss it, that is often what the person actually wants when they talk about transparency. They want someone to listen to them and noted and knew who they were, and followed up, right? And I think that idea of being a way to receive information or receive ideas is really important to building that trust.
I really liked the opinion from someone, a community member who participated in something like this, that said some of the meetings that are too much about telling and not enough about listening, which leads to a lot of disengagement, especially among minority groups. And I just think that's so relatable. And I think that also like to me, like exactly what you said, a lot of this is not necessarily for putting on a presentation and reading a script. It's to give people an opportunity to share what they need to share, because sometimes that's all a person needs to do to find their resolution, is have someone to talk to and listen. But I really like that quote that you put in there.
And on the point about listening, one thing I do want to reiterate, because I think we talk about norms later, is it is absolutely essential, that if someone has a specific personal concern about their student or themselves as an employee, that gets directed to the appropriate channel, whether it's say, please talk to your teacher, please talk to your principal, please talk to the superintendent. That is, an absolutely essential thing. And often that might be the result of this conversation. Someone may come and say, oh man, I've got this problem with school, my students, I'm sorry to hear you're experiencing that. Let me give you Joe's phone number, right? And share that with him so you can follow up and make sure that it's resolved appropriately. Or let me, be sure you talk to your principal. Let me look up your principal's name so you know who to contact in case you don't know your principal yet. Here's the name and number, and if they don't, et cetera. So I think that might be the end of the conversations 80% of the time, and that's also okay.
Which is exactly what we do anyways. So I feel like it's not like this is opening us up to a new source of that's the same response you have if someone comes to you by yourself in the grocery store or whatever.
And I think the same may be true when it comes to, accuracy of information about the budget itself, right? We might have a board member ready to visit these opportunities, be armed with the basic documents of our preliminary budgets. We have that information, and if there's more detailed questions, right, that's a follow-up, let me CC you on an email to Dr. Zayowski so I can get that question answered for you. You don't have to answer, and kicking the can on those. When we think about the timeline for when we would like these events to happen, I just want to point out our next board meeting is in June. So I guess this is maybe a question for Abe or a question for the whole board. It seems to me that if we want to act on this, that we would be asking for volunteers this evening to start kind of going right away. That if we waited for our next board meeting, it would be too late. To create a work group like this, we don't need an official action per se, the board.
Is that a question for me?
I guess so, I don't know. It's a question for everybody. I guess I wonder how people feel about that. Are there objections to starting something?
If I can make a suggestion, I think a way to start, so it's clear in terms of goals, is for there to be a work group established with 3 people that does not include me. I think that's actually important. One, because I talk too much, and 2, because I think it's actually important that it is like that the board is has lots of different kind of voices involved, right? And I talk too much. And secondly, that an easy way to start, based on the conversation last board meeting, is the very first thing that subgroup could do is propose to get 2 board members, themselves or someone else, to, sit at a table at the first farmer's market, which is this coming Saturday. And all they would have to do is, the 3 people, figure out who's gonna be there and how to share that information with the public so that people might wanna come by and talk. And that's all it would take to start this sort of process. And then from there, there can be more exploration.
Can I get Jim's opinion on this? Are you,
My opinion?
yeah, are you excited, are you nervous? Are you?
No, I really appreciate that, the board wants to do what they can to try to, make things as good as they can be. I just jotted down a couple notes, and first of all, to the question about can the board establish committees, absolutely. Policy 184 says that the board may establish ad hoc committees as needed from time to time. Members of such committees should be appointed by the president, and then the committees will terminate upon the completion of the assignments. Now, that's not to say that it couldn't be an ongoing committee, but I think especially for the interim, having it be an ad hoc committee makes a lot of sense. I'm still processing this. I didn't see any of it until basically, Thursday. I just want to be supportive of the board and what the board wants. We have a lot of opportunities. I think Michelle kind of hit on that already. I do worry a little bit about those opportunities being so repetitive with the same people. I do think things like our mid-year budget hearing is something that we put on that has a lot of information, but again, that's a lot of talk. It's not a lot of listen. So I do like the idea of providing listening. I think you're going to be surprised though. I mean, the title of this agenda item, and maybe it's mistitled, is to discuss the creation of a budget work group. I think you'll be surprised that most of the stuff you're going to hear has really nothing to do with the budget. And I think you're going to get some very challenging things reported, very personal, things like that, that it is going to be difficult, I think. But providing that opportunity to get anything that isn't already being handled at the buildings to the correct spot, I think is good, and if this helps get people to that, and we can resolve issues, I think that could be good. But I think if you truly are talking about a budget work group, I think you're gonna have to target, specific groups. And I did, that was part of the conversations I had with some people about the referendum. One of the suggestions was, you have to go out, from the schools. And I don't think people recognize that we did go out quite a bit, when talking about the referendum, whether we're talking about the Lions Club or the county board or the city council or the Rotary group. I mean, we did go out quite a bit. I tried to go out to townships, and I really did not have success with being able to be invited to townships. I think that showed with the vote, where many of the townships were at. But I think you're gonna have to target it, and maybe the farmer's market is a good idea. But I think whatever you do, we're here to support, and I would just want to kind of clearly know what the expectations are for me and the team here at the district, because it sounds fairly open-ended to me. And that's not a bad thing, I think it's pretty open-ended. And to Dale's point, I wonder how many of you, I've worked with a lot of school board members, and only one member of our board right now, and she's not here, Amy, I think she's the only member that's not in their first term on the board. And for a first term board member to be able to speak about district policies and the budget confidently, I think can be very challenging. And I know some of you have past experiences or have invested so much time already that, you know, like Abe, he did a great job with that community conversation. I was super impressed how much research he had done and how much he knew. But frankly, if I go sit at the farmer's market, I'd say I'd probably be able to answer maybe 2/3 of the questions. And a third of them, I'm gonna have to go and say, well, let me check with Brian, let me check with Sam, let me check with Tony, let me check with Leah. And I mean, that's me. You know, I've lived this for 10 years here and 8 years prior. So I do think as a board member in that situation, I think it could be very challenging, but I think the effort would be much appreciated.
I'd be happy to direct them to you too, if I can't answer the questions. I mean, I just think with the whole referendum and just people that I'm associated with, and I would talk to them about it, and I'm still learning, and that's why I had these questions about it. They're like, well, we don't want this and we don't want that. And I'm like, have you read anything? Have you gone to a meeting? Have you looked online? And they said no. And so for me, because I have relationships with people, right, and that's what we know with different folks, well, having the opportunity to have this conversation, I think would be more beneficial than saying, you know, go talk to this person or go read this online, because, you know what I mean, people are talking in their own circles anyways, so. I mean, I don't expect us to have all the answers, but just an opportunity to connect with us too.
It might be worth spending some time thinking about as the group or as we sort of create these opportunities, how, you know, I think it's probably true that no matter what you do, people are gonna come with their own grievances or kind of whatever happens to be on their mind. But I think there is some opportunity for communicating about it as a, you know, however we want to say it, as a budget listening session, as something that is related to this specific topic. I mean, I think we have some ability to sort of think about it in that way and direct it in that way. And as Joe said, to target where we're going and who we're sort of reaching out to.
I like the idea of starting it as a budget listening session work group, seeing what works, reviewing in 6 months, and then it could potentially serve as a template for something larger or, you know, rotating topics.
Yes.
I guess, is there any opposition to moving forward with this? If we, as long as we're kind of careful and keep thinking about it and keep working on it. So are there 3 volunteers? And
I was waiting for something.
And I think it's worth reiterating that the 3 of you would not need to be the people who are at every opportunity, and to make sure you're bugging the rest of us to do the work too, and be there. Do we need to say anything else about how that group will get started, or do you all just call it tomorrow?
I just, in case you haven't looked at it, just like, I think the proposal, the 1-page proposal, less than a page, is I think self-explanatory in terms of like the goals and responsibilities that was intended. And it really is meant to be like very limited, right? So it shouldn't be overwhelming if those kind of responsibilities are noted.
With respect to the very specific thing you mentioned about the farmer's market, if you actually did want to do this Saturday, please come talk to me first. I've got information you for that.
I would suggest that even if the group of 3 is going to get together and work on something directed by the board, I would suggest posting that. Technically, you want to have a quorum, but because you're working on behalf of the board at that point, I think to be safe, I would at least post the meeting, which we would be happy to do. And then the other thing that I can offer immediately is the communication piece. You know, we do have, I think, pretty good communication. I know some people would like to see it differently, but I think our ability to communicate through the district with our email server, with our social media, I think could be very helpful for whatever the board's intention is on this.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody, for this good discussion, and thanks for the folks who volunteered to pilot this work group. Is there any additional discussion needed on this work group or additional questions?
Well, I was just gonna say, even though I didn't volunteer to be on it, I'm always happy to like go anywhere, so. Just let me know. Except for this Saturday.
All right. Anything else? Okay, next up we have changes to the employee handbook for 2024-25.
So every year, we review the employee handbook, and I kind of already talked about that a little earlier with the changes from collective bargaining to the employee handbook and how things operate in school districts in Wisconsin. This year, I'd say there's been a more thorough review than what we've had really since COVID. And this is just a first review. We'll be bringing back any final language to the board for your approval this summer. Ideally, we would have it approved before July 1st. So I would anticipate having this on the next meeting for approval, but depending on the amount of discussion that needs to occur, you know, it could be done later than that if needed. So the changes, I mean, there's always editorial changes with, you know, the updated salary schedules and things like that. I'm not going to spend any time there. But in working with Sam, with the building principals, and also feedback over the year with QIC, there's a few things that we're looking to address. One thing is when we talk about staff attendance, and the first bullet point there really is just clarifying how employees report absences. A lot of people do a great job, but I think there's some improvements that can be made there. I'm gonna go ahead and skip down then to other ones, and we'll come back. Remind me to come back. I'll try to group these a little bit. The next one, approval of personal leave requests and total number of employees for personal leave requests. Again, that's just kind of you know, clarifying expectations for that communication. And Sam, feel free to jump in on any of these because Sam's done a lot of the work with this. And then the one that's probably going to get the most attention is in terms of the reporting procedure. And what we're finding is that a large majority of our staff members have great work attendance. In fact, I would say some people probably should not come to work sometimes or a board meeting. I know you're not contagious, but you know, but it is. It's in our culture. It's in our Midwest culture of, you know, fighting through and grinding through, and that's much appreciated. And our teachers and employees are so committed here. But we, like any organization, we do have that smaller percentage. You know, yeah, what is, you know, 10 to 15% that, you know, every single day of possible paid leave people use. And our district is very generous with the amount of paid leave that we provide to our employees. And that's on purpose. It's been a long tradition. You know, we want to make sure that people are well cared for, and that's a good benefit. But some people treat those paid leave days as PTO days, that essentially, you know, you can take off for anything, anytime you want. And then there's other people that'll try to play the system and, you know, maybe have an appointment, you know, a dentist appointment at 9 o'clock in the morning and take a whole day off, things like that. Well, with only 175 student days in a public school, that is very problematic. And, you know, our teachers certainly, you know, the conception that teachers get the summer off and they're gonna be at the beach every day, we all know that's not true. You know, many of our teachers teach summer school, many of our teachers, you know, get another job, many of our teachers are doing professional development training. But the fact of the matter is, in education, summer is different than the school year. You know, the school year, that's when we make the hay. You know, you gotta make the hay when you can make the hay, right? Well, we do have this percentage of employees that make it very difficult to make the hay. And we're trying to improve that. And with the reporting procedure, we have always had in the district that if someone misses work, we can require some sort of doctor's note or dentist note or medical provider note to verify that absence. Very, very rarely do we utilize that. But with what we're seeing and some of the trends that we're seeing and more people being gone for more days, we think that's something that probably needs to be used more often, especially with some of the people that are missing the highest amount of work. Well, we don't want to just start requesting verifications. We want to kind of have some consistency. We also don't want to, we want to treat people like professionals. And we've tried to blend that with the language that's been developed. So essentially, the first 5 days, we realize people are going to get colds and get sick and things like that. And we want to take people at their word. At the same time, once we have, those days start to mount up, we want to let people know ahead of time that we are going to start, asking for some verifications. And that's what that language, basically says there. We got some initial feedback. Our QIC people have not had this very long, so we are gonna wait before we give a final proposal to the board to approve. Sam also has called a special QIC meeting, is that next Monday?
Yes, yeah.
Because we wanna be able to discuss this with them as well. But we do think something has to happen, and we think this language helps us get there. So then I'm gonna go back up to the top. And the next one has to do with communications. And I know, Abe, when we talked about the proposal with, sitting down, and I was very glad to hear that the board is committed to, continuing to use lines of communication or chain of command or whatever we want to term that as. But I think that that's important to also have in our handbook so that, people understand what the expectation is. We send this out, ever since I've been here, multiple times a year. I remind people about, if you have a concern, we want to address those concerns in a very effective and efficient manner. And to do that, we do it with the immediate supervisor first, and then if it's not resolved, then it goes up to the district level, and ultimately if it's not resolved, it can come up to the board level. And this would kind of detail those lines of communication. Other things are more, I think, just kind of clarifying or updating some of our practices to make sure that what's in the handbook is aligned with practice in the district. There also is some stuff that related to employees' start dates and when their benefits begin. So that's been clarified with some of this language. But it's the earlier items that I mentioned that probably will have the most attention. Sam, is there anything you want to point out that I missed?
No, I think you covered everything. If people have specific questions, I can try to answer those as well. I will say that with the insurance start dates, I did touch base with all of the Big Rivers HR directors, and this is more in line with what is being done consistently in our area. So that's a small piece, like Joe said, but a small change that we're making. That's probably not gonna get a lot of attention, but just so you know, there's been some background on that as well.
Any questions or concerns or suggestions related to this?
The only edit that caught my eye was, I'm just curious about what the reasoning was. On the very last item, went from 10 to 20 days, consecutive days for the going to long-term hourly substitutes. What was the 20 days, 20 consecutive school days seems like a lot, right? Because that's almost a month of.
Sure. Yeah. So actually, this is an update that I caught that we changed probably a couple years ago when we increased the pay for our long-term substitutes. And it was changed in one area, but I missed it in the second area. So that's it's just in line with what we're doing right now. So on the 21st day, that's when the long-term pay kicks in. But I will say that if it is retroactive. So if somebody is with us, intending to be with us for 2 weeks and then it turns into more than that, then the pay is retroactive from the beginning of that absence.
How often roughly do we have long-term substitutes? I mean, for it to be that long, it must be someone's out for, a leave of absence of some kind or, severe medical family issues, et cetera.
most of what we see is maternity leaves. But yeah, it's in a district this size with this number of employees, we see it quite frequently. I've already got my list started for the fall and I'm planning for, when those babies are coming this summer as well.
I suppose there's fewer instances where somebody is brought in as a short-term sub and jumps into that one, which I must be fairly rare.
Yeah, but it does happen, yeah, for sure.
With respect to the two sort of larger changes, I know Joe mentioned that the QIC meeting, or I saw also the email, has been called for next week. And I think it'll be great to have an opportunity, like I know these were sent to those committee members last few days ago.
Yeah, that's great.
But I know this is also an extremely busy time of year. I hope most people are able to make it on Monday. But I think it'll be good to have an opportunity for people to kind of talk around the table about them too. Yeah, so I guess that's all I was going to say. I'm glad that there'll be an opportunity for that meeting to happen before we come to vote on that.
One thing I'm curious about in the QIC angle, and by the way, I think I'm on QIC this year. I won't be able to make that meeting, but you're on QIC meeting?
And I can do that on day two, since we can.
I'm curious about, how often employees bring suggestions to QIC, say, oh, we'd like to see this in the handbook. So we talked about the history of QIC previously, that would have been something that was done in React 10 days, is this kind of back and forth about what should be in there from different people's perspectives. I'm curious how, if there's a mechanism by which your suggestions can be discussed through QIC and brought in maybe for the board to consider.
And we have had suggestions over the years. Now, this year when we asked, we didn't have any, but so much attention was on the budget and the potential list reductions and things like that. I will say though, we have received some now, and Sam and I just got them today, we just went through them. So we will have, this is not gonna be the complete list that the board sees in June. These will be on the list, although I do think there's probably some language modifications that we're looking at based on the feedback we've already received.
Okay.
Since this went out.
Thanks.
Anything else?
I'm guessing that it's not listed here just because there's no changes to it, but in the benefits portion with the commencement and termination points, is there a sentence that follows that in the handbook existing that says benefits are terminated?
Okay, yeah, there's a whole section on, well, it does say commencement and termination of benefits, yes, so there is more to that, or it might come in a following section, but this, again, trying to keep it concise and easy for you guys to read, I just want to look at that small portion.
Oh, yeah, this is a very executive summary, but the link to the entire handbook is there, and we cross-referenced the page numbers and everything, if you want to see it in its full context. Any other thoughts?
And next up, we have student and parent handbooks for 2024-2025.
Yeah, every year the principals do a great job modifying their handbooks. They've got them all done. They're here for the board to review. We'll put those back on the next agenda for your approval. But if there's any questions, concerns, or suggestions, please get those to us as soon as possible in case any conversations have to be had, especially if they're dealing with things that we might need staff input on. It's going to be really important that we get that back in a timely fashion so that those conversations can be happening before the end of the school year. But most things are the same. Brian, I know that you and Katie worked on some language related to artificial intelligence.
Yeah, and very minor, just adding some wording within the section about acceptable use to include that those tools include generative tools. And really it falls within the acceptable use policy, which is already there, as well as the guidelines for electronic communication as well.
Does anyone have questions or discussion regarding those student and parent handbooks? Now we'll move on to We have a review of Exhibit 165, Board of Education norms and operating procedures. And we have that, this is a board policy, so that's linked here for you. And I think we brought this up, this policy was implemented in 2019, has not been revised since then. I think was brought up, sort of as there might be some things in here that are no longer quite current in terms of, especially in terms of electronic communication. So there's sort of a question of, do we want to make any amendments to this policy? Do we want to change anything at all? Also, do we want to have any discussion about what we are all as a board agreeing to here?
I think the section on electronic communication, and social media is worthy of discussion at some point. I'm not ready for it tonight, but I just think back, and actually, Joe and I have talked about this before, like over the winter leading up to the February referendum, there was a lot of discussion on the various social media groups in town, and I, and in some cases a couple others, but mostly me, I was trying really hard to get kind of non-combative informational answers, but it kind of inevitably, as social media does, it kind of snowballed where it was like a full-time job for 2 weeks, responding to a ridiculous number of very ungrounded to reality questions and comments. And I wasn't trying to speak for the board, and I was genuinely trying really hard to not neither speak for the board nor give opinion, just kind of like, here's what the fine stuff and here's what the numbers are. But think again, it shouldn't have gone that way, and I think that it's worthy of discussion and at some point, how to handle those situations. This document is sort of in that ballpark, but this is more what am I trying to say here? I think the line between speaking for the board and not when it comes to social media or personal use versus you kind of responding to commentary, whatever, these are shifting boundaries in social media in a way that is, you can see the other side of it really easily or really quickly. So I guess I kind of wonder if there's some opportunity for the board to discuss what better, maybe if there's more opportunity. 2019 doesn't seem like that long ago, and it's like a lifetime ago. And in social media world, 5 years is a million years, right? So even just the way people correspond, what the memes are, etc. So I wonder if it's worthy of discussion to really figure out what should electronic communication look like by board members, and how to kind of know when we're getting too close to those bounds of acceptable or kind of accidental misuse. So I think I probably stepped over it a couple of times, not intending to, but got kind of pulled that way, just the way social media behaves.
I take your point about not necessarily being prepared to figure out exactly what this ought to say tonight. To me, I think there's a couple of questions, right? And some of them are highly specific, right? So we have a couple of bullet points here that really are really specifically about social media. And I think there is potential that because the world has changed since 2019, maybe we want to reword some of them. I think there's also kind of a broader question of, does this reflect the needs of the board at this time, and do we want to add anything or subtract anything, I guess, overall? And I think, I guess I also think there's to me, a question, I guess it's not in this policy, I was thinking it was in this policy, Joe, but it had been custom of the board, I guess, or habit of the board to have a board retreat once a year. And sometimes that was facilitated and, sometimes it was not, but, a place where the board had an opportunity to kind of think more deeply about some of these norms and how we engage with one another and how we engage with the community. And I think there's also a question to me of, we decided not to do that last year. And I think there's kind of the question of if we want to return to that, if we want to try to schedule a retreat for the summer. It was typically done in the summer. Or not.
Seems like everyone's maybe a little fried. Is this something we maybe want to come back to?
Yeah. I mean, we could put on the agenda, we could put this as a discussion item on the agenda again in June. And maybe, maybe all of us will kind of have had a little more time to think about, if there are specific changes to this policy we want to engage in. They don't need to be made during the meeting. We can kind of decide that we want to revise it. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just looking at this bullet point 2 that says we agreed to review and update policy 166. So maybe if we could take 165 and 166 and bump them onto the next agenda, we could take a peek at them together.
I think the other one the board might want to look at is 153 board self-evaluation. I think that's the one you were referring to, Rachel, with the retreat. And, frankly, the board has been operating so well. And I think everyone was in survival mode with the pandemic. Again, that norms policy was put in 2019, so it's pre-pandemic. And everything shifted into survival mode. But now we're kind of coming out of survival mode and getting back into, long-range thinking and all that stuff. And I think, it probably makes sense for the board to review these, one, to make sure they're current, but also, this is a new board and, you can all decide exactly what you want to do moving forward. And maybe that could be a retreat within itself, Rachel.
Would it make sense to put an agenda item on our first meeting to review 155 or 165 and 166 and 153? All in one, because I can just do a single item. And the self-evaluation is something that, I guess I think our board policy does actually ask us to do every year, and we did not do that after last year. But it isn't a requirement from any sort of state agency. It's something the board can decide to do or not do ourselves.
Yeah, and that was the will of the board last year. I know that the board decided not to do it, which it can suspend the rules. And I don't think it was formally done in terms of the Robert's Rules of Order thing, but the will of the board was clear.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think back to that last board retreat we had, which was 2 years ago. I believe only the three of us, Dominic, Rachel, and myself, were there, right?
And Amy.
And Amy, who's not here today, which is interesting. So what happened was, the board, I believe we were at Jake's. We had, then WASB president, executive director, sorry. There to kind of facilitate a discussion about board norms and how the board wants to interact, with itself and with the public, and kind of, in some sort of a discussion of some of these topics. Yeah, but it was just thinking through who was there and who's here, it was a very different group. But we were finding a venue to do that. I don't know if that's.
Bob Butler, one of the attorneys from WASB, does a terrific job advising boards on these issues. And I think he'd be very beneficial for, especially our newest board members, to hear from him. But I also know there's a lot of moving pieces right now and a lot of work being done. And there's only so much capacity. But when we start talking about things like these work groups and things like that, maybe changing expectations related to social media, I think having someone from the School Board Association provide some background and advice might be beneficial.
So we'll put that on the agenda for June. Right. Anything else on that topic? Now we'll move on to items related to next meeting dates, board committees, and reports. May 22nd, we have the retirement mixer at 4 o'clock at the middle school. Graduation is May 26th, 2 p.m. at the high school. May 27th is Memorial Day, there will be no board meeting that day. June 3rd is the CISA 11 annual convention in Turtle Lake. I believe Amy Riddle Swanson will be our delegate there. Last day of school for students is June 4th. June 5th is your professional development day for staff. Our next regular board meeting is June 10th. And our special board meeting is June 24th. There are still some WASB spring workshops, and I think this online one is still available if folks want to enroll in that, they can contact Jen. And there is an attached PDF of the invitation for the retirement mixer. Any questions or discussion on these items? If not, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So
Okay, adjourn. Thank you.